A millionaire's affair shocked his wife so much that she had difficulty giving birth and lost her baby. No one expected that when the millionaire's eldest son hugged his unfortunate younger brother goodbye, there was a sound. The scent of roasted rosemary chicken filled the vast expanse of the Spencer estate, curling through the grand hallways like an invisible thread connecting each room. The golden hour bathed the floor-to-ceiling windows in warm amber, reflecting off the polished oak floors. Outside, the garden stretched in perfect symmetry. Trimmed hedges, a fountain bubbling softly, and the faint rustling of leaves as dusk settled. Diane moved carefully around the kitchen, her fingers gliding over the marble countertops, occasionally pausing to press her palm against the small of her back. The weight of 7 months of pregnancy made her slower, but she refused to relinquish control. The house, though grand and spacious, was theirs, and only theirs. She had insisted on handling things herself, not wanting a permanent staff bustling through their space, but Charlie, forever the practical one, had hired weekend help, knowing she would never ask for assistance herself. The house was silent, except for the clinking of plates and the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, but the quiet was soon interrupted by the rapid, uneven footsteps of an 8-year-old boy. Kevin darted into the kitchen, his sneakers skidding against the tiles as he pressed both hands onto the counter to steady himself. "Mom, did you know baby pandas are born the size of a stick of butter?" His voice was all breathless excitement, his dark eyes wide with curiosity. Diane laughed, shaking her head as she reached for a serving dish. "That's very specific, sweetheart. Where did you learn that?" "The Discovery Channel," Kevin announced proudly, climbing onto one of the bar stools. "Dad says when my little brother comes, I can teach him cool facts about animals. Do you think he'll like pandas?" "I think he'll like anything his big brother teaches him." Diane smiled, placing a slice of bread on his plate. "But first, he has to get here." Kevin hummed in agreement, stuffing a piece of bread into his mouth. "How much longer?" 2 more months, she said, rubbing her belly absent-mindedly. His face scrunched up. "That's forever." "Not as long as you think," came a deep voice from the doorway. Both Diane and Kevin turned as Charlie walked in, effortlessly pulling off the look of a man who had spent the entire day in back-to-back meetings, yet still carried himself with ease. His suit jacket was draped over his arm, and his tie loosened just enough to suggest he had begun the process of unwinding. Kevin immediately launched off the stool and ran toward him. "Dad, did you know baby pandas are the size of a stick of butter?" Charlie finished, catching him mid-run and hoisting him into the air before setting him down with a chuckle. "Yeah, I heard. That's a pretty crazy fact." Kevin beamed, pleased with himself, before running to the dining table to set out the silverware. Charlie exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he stepped closer to Diane. His gaze softened as he looked at her. "You didn't have to cook tonight." "I wanted to," she said simply. "It's your last night home before Spain." Something flickered in Charlie's expression, guilt, maybe, or regret. But it was brief, gone before it could settle. He reached out, tugging a stray strand of her hair behind her ear. "I'll be back before you know it." Diane nodded, but the weight in her chest remained. The dinner table was filled with the kind of warmth that comes from habit. The clinking of forks against plates, the soft murmur of conversation, Kevin's animated gestures as he spoke about school, soccer, and how he was preparing to be the best big brother in history. "And when the baby is big enough, I'll teach him to ride a bike," Kevin declared confidently, stabbing his fork into a piece of chicken. Charlie chuckled. "You might want to start with something simpler. Maybe teach him how to say your name first." Kevin considered this, then nodded. "Okay, but after that we're going straight to dinosaurs." Diane smiled, watching the two of them interact. Charlie was an enigma to most people, calm, composed, sharp. But with Kevin, he was different. He softened, leaned in, listened, and made time. It was what made this whole departure feel heavier than it should. She didn't want to be the wife who clung, who asked too many questions, who feared the worst, but a whisper of unease clung to her ribs. Later that night, after Kevin had been tucked into bed and the last of the dinner dishes had been put away, Charlie stood by the doorway, suitcase packed, ready to go. Diane wrapped her arms around herself, leaning against the doorframe. "You'll call when you land?" "Of course." He adjusted the strap of his bag before glancing at her. "And I'll be back before the baby arrives. I promise." She nodded, forcing a smile. "Safe flight." Charlie leaned in, pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead. "Get some rest." She watched as he stepped into the night. The headlights of his waiting car illuminated the driveway. Kevin's small figure appeared beside her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Dad's coming back, right?" Diane placed a hand on his shoulder. "Of course, sweetheart." But as the car pulled away, disappearing down the long road leading from their estate, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something irreversible. The late afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the nursery floor, warm and dappled through the pale blue curtains. Diane sat on the edge of the armchair, folding tiny onesies into neat stacks. Her movements were rhythmic, almost meditative. The faint scent of freshly washed cotton and lavender filled the room. Across from her, Kevin was sprawled on the plush cream rug, meticulously lining up his toy dinosaurs in an elaborate battle scene. "Mum, do you think the baby will like dinosaurs?" he asked, positioning a T-Rex on a makeshift hill of pillows. Diane smiled, smoothing out a onesie with tiny sailboats printed on it. "I think he'll love whatever his big brother teaches him." Kevin beamed, shifting onto his elbows. "I'm going to teach him all their names, even the hard ones." Diane watched him for a moment, warmth settling in her chest. It had been 3 weeks since Charlie left for Spain, and despite the physical exhaustion of the 3rd trimester, she felt a sense of calm. Charlie called every evening, sometimes late, sometimes hurried, but he always called. His voice, though distant, was steady, carrying reassurance across the miles. She reached for another onesie, just as the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house. It was unexpected. Delivery usually came in the morning, and the weekend housekeeper had left hours ago. Diane hesitated before pushing herself up, exhaling as the weight of her belly shifted. "I'll get it," she murmured, ruffling Kevin's hair as she walked past. At the front door, a small, unmarked brown envelope rested neatly on the welcome mat. There was no return address, no indication of where it had come from. Diane frowned, picking it up, her fingers tracing the rough edges of the paper. A strange unease settled in her stomach. She stepped back inside, closing the door behind her, and slowly peeled open the envelope. Inside was a thick stack of glossy photographs. Her fingers faltered as she pulled them out, the first image catching the light in an almost cruel clarity. Charlie. Charlie is standing in the dim glow of a hotel entrance, his hand hovering over the small of a woman's back. She was young and stunning, her blonde hair falling in soft waves over her shoulder. In the next photo, they were inside. Charlie leaning close, his hand now firmly at her waist, as they walked deeper into the hotel lobby. Diane's breath caught. She flipped to the next one. The woman's heels clicked against marble flooring. The concierge stood behind the desk. Charlie's posture was easy, familiar. Another photo. The woman's door. Charlie is standing in front of it, his head tilted toward her, their faces close. The last image was the worst. The door opened. Charlie is stepping inside. Diane's stomach lurched. Her vision blurred at the edges as she lowered herself onto the bench by the foyer, the photos clutched in her trembling hands. The air felt too thin, pressing against her ribs, suffocating. Number. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening. She forced herself to look again, to search for something, anything, that would explain this away. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe it was staged. Maybe... But Charlie had been in Spain for weeks, and these photos were dated. Her fingers clenched around the edges, bending the glossy paper. He had called her just last night. He told her he missed her, told Kevin he'd bring back souvenirs. His voice had been warm, steady. A sob built in her throat, sharp and painful. From the nursery, Kevin's voice called out, light and innocent. "Mom?" Diane tried to swallow down the hysteria rising inside her, but the walls felt like they were closing in. Her chest constricted, and her vision swayed. The photographs slipped from her grip, fluttering onto the polished floor like dead leaves. The world tilted. Somewhere far away, Kevin's footsteps padded closer. "Mum?" She couldn't answer. The last thing she felt was the sharp, consuming pain in her abdomen before the room spun into darkness. The sound of rushing footsteps shattered the stillness of the house. Kevin stood frozen in the doorway, his wide eyes darting from his mother's crumpled form to the red pooling beneath her. The pale silk of her maternity dress darkened rapidly, the liquid seeping outward like an unfurling bloom. His chest heaved, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps as he lurched forward. "Mom! Mom!" His voice cracked as he dropped to his knees beside her. Diane's face was unnaturally pale, her eyes fluttering, unfocused. Her breath hitched, shallow and weak. Kevin's small hands shook violently as he reached for her. He didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make it stop. The blood, so much blood, was everywhere, sticky and warm against his fingertips. His throat tightened, and suddenly he couldn't breathe either. His mind screamed at him to move, to do something. The phone. With fumbling fingers, he scrambled across the floor, nearly slipping on the glossy photographs scattered around them. He didn't see them anymore, didn't care. 911. The ringing on the other end felt endless. Then, "This is emergency services. What is your emergency?" Kevin's breath came in frantic, uneven sobs. "My mum, she's bleeding. She fell, and she's not waking up. My mum is pregnant. More than 7 months. Please hurry." "Stay on the line, sweetheart." The operator's voice softened, but Kevin barely heard it over the roaring in his ears. "Is she breathing?" Kevin's gaze flickered back to Diane. Her chest rose and fell, but barely. "Yeah, but it's slow. She's not talking." "Help is on the way. I need you to stay with her. Keep talking to her." Kevin dropped the phone onto the speaker and crawled back to Diane, gripping her hand tightly. It was cold, fingers limp in his grasp. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Mum, wake up. Please wake up." Her eyes fluttered slightly, but she didn't respond. A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder and closer. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the walls as the front door burst open. Then everything blurred. Kevin sat in the back of the ambulance, his feet swinging just above the floor. His fingers were still stained red. A paramedic crouched in front of him, speaking in a calm voice, but Kevin barely registered the words. All he could focus on was Diane, lying motionless on the stretcher, an oxygen mask covering her face. The beeping of the machines felt too loud, too fast, like a countdown ticking away. Kevin had never seen his mother look this way before. She was always moving, always busy, folding laundry, cooking, smoothing his hair with soft hands. Now she was still, too still. The paramedic placed a gentle hand on Kevin's shoulder. "She's fighting, buddy. We're going to take good care of her." Kevin nodded, but his throat felt tight, like he was swallowing glass. He wanted to believe them, needed to. But all he could hear was the sound of his own voice, breaking as he called her name over and over again. And she didn't answer. The hospital was colder than he expected. Kevin sat in the waiting area, small and alone in a chair too big for him. His hands were balled into fists in his lap, his legs swinging restlessly. He kept staring at the double doors, waiting for someone to come out and tell him it was all a mistake. That his mom would be fine, that everything would go back to normal. He wanted his dad. He wanted to hear Charlie's voice, to have him walk through the doors and fix everything the way he always did. But he wasn't here. Kevin clenched his jaw, pressing his lips together. A doctor finally emerged, kneeling in front of him. His face was kind, but his expression was serious. "Kevin, your mum is very sick," he said gently. "She lost a lot of blood. The baby is also in danger." Kevin's stomach twisted. "But she's going to be okay, right?" The doctor hesitated. And that was when Kevin's heart truly dropped. "We're doing everything we can," the doctor said, his voice steady. "But Kevin, we need to ask you something important." Kevin's hands curled into the fabric of his shirt. He didn't like the way the doctor was looking at him. "If it comes to it," the doctor's voice softened, "we may have to make a choice. Your mum or the baby." Kevin's breath stilled. A choice, his mum or his little brother. His vision blurred, his chest tightening painfully. This wasn't real. This wasn't fair. His fingers dug into the chair's armrest, gripping it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He thought about Diane's bedtime stories and the way she always kissed his forehead before turning off the lights. He thought about the way she'd laughed earlier that day, smoothing out tiny baby clothes and humming softly as if nothing in the world could touch them. He thought about how she was the only person in the world who made him feel safe. His lips trembled. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Save Mum." The moment the words left his lips, Kevin felt the weight of them settle in his chest like a stone, sinking, pulling him under. The doctor nodded, rising swiftly before disappearing through the double doors. The heavy steel flaps swung shut with a soft thud, and Kevin was left staring at the emptiness they left behind. His legs dangled over the edge of the chair, too short to touch the floor. His hands curled into small fists, fingernails pressing into his palms. He wanted to cry, to scream, to run, but he stayed still, frozen in the cold, sterile air of the hospital waiting room. Outside, a storm had begun to brew. Rain lashed against the windows, streaking the glass in frantic patterns. Kevin barely noticed. Time stretched and bent in unnatural ways. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Somewhere down the hall, he could hear the hurried footsteps of nurses, the distant beeping of machines, and the muffled voices of doctors speaking in terms he didn't understand. But none of it mattered. All that mattered was what lay beyond those doors. Kevin didn't know how long he had been sitting there when the doctor finally returned. The man's face was unreadable, but Kevin saw it in his eyes, the hesitation, the way his lips pressed into a thin line before he spoke. "Your mum is stable." The breath Kevin hadn't realized he was holding escaped his lips in a choked sob. Relief, overwhelming and crushing, flooded his small body. His mother was alive. But then the doctor's face shifted, and suddenly the air felt thick again. "We did everything we could," the doctor continued, his voice quieter now, measured. "But the baby, he didn't make it." Kevin's heart lurched. The baby, his little brother, the one he had spent months talking to, whispering secrets against his mother's belly, promising to teach him all about dinosaurs and spaceships and the best hiding spots in the house. Gone. Kevin barely registered the doctor's words after that. Something about complications, about timing, about how sometimes, no matter how hard they tried, some things just couldn't be saved. He nodded numbly, his throat too tight to speak. The doctor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You can see your mum now." Kevin slid off the chair, his legs shaky, and followed him down the hall. The room smelled of antiseptic and something faintly floral, but underneath it lingered the metallic scent of blood. The soft glow of the overhead light cast long shadows across the sterile white walls. Diane lay motionless in the hospital bed, her skin pale against the sheets. An IV line trailed from her arm, machines humming softly beside her. Her chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths, but she didn't turn to look at him. Kevin hesitated in the doorway. He had imagined this moment differently. He thought she would smile at him, tell him she was okay, and squeeze his hand the way she always did. But she didn't move. Carefully, he stepped closer, pulling the chair beside the bed. He sat down, his hands folding in his lap. The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. He didn't know what to say. His eyes trailed to the far side of the room, where a small bassinet stood empty. The sight of it made his stomach twist. It had been prepared, ready. But now, it was just an absence, a hollow space where his little brother should have been. Kevin swallowed hard. "Mom?" Diane woke to the soft hum of machines and the distant murmur of voices in the hallway. Her body felt heavy, her throat dry, but before she could make sense of the discomfort, she remembered the pain, the blood, the fear in Kevin's voice. And then nothing. She turned her head slowly, wincing at the ache in her limbs, and saw him, Kevin, sitting by her bed, small and silent. His eyes were rimmed red, his face pale. Diane swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "Kevin." His head snapped up, his lips parting in a silent breath of relief. He reached forward hesitantly, as if afraid she would disappear. Diane's chest tightened. "The baby?" She saw the flicker in his eyes before he looked away. Kevin didn't answer. The door creaked open before he had to. A nurse entered, followed closely by the doctor. Diane barely heard the words, the gentle explanation, "We did everything we could," the condolences. Her child was gone. She gasped, a sharp, broken sound that filled the sterile room. The world blurred as grief crashed into her, raw and violent. "No," she choked, shaking her head. "No, no, no." Kevin flinched at the sound of her sobs, his small hands gripping the sheets, desperate to anchor himself to something. Diane's body trembled as she clutched her stomach, as if she could still hold on to him, as if she could somehow bring him back. "I'm sorry," Kevin whispered. His voice was barely audible, but Diane heard it. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and realization struck her like a blow. He had chosen. Her breath hitched, her chest tightening unbearably. She couldn't get air, couldn't think, and couldn't breathe. For a woman, there is no greater pain than being betrayed by her husband and losing her baby. Yet Diane was suffering both. It was too cruel for her. The monitors beeped wildly. The nurse moved quickly, calling her name, but Diane barely heard her before the darkness swallowed her whole. Kevin had never seen a dead body before. He had seen things that were broken, his toy robot when it fell off the stairs, a bird lying still on the sidewalk after hitting the glass window, but never something like this. Never someone. The hospital room was colder than the rest of the hallway, the air thick with something too heavy to name. The baby was small, so small that Kevin wondered how someone so tiny could carry such a weight in his chest. A white sheet covered the still form in the bassinet. Kevin hesitated. A nurse stood beside him, her voice gentle but distant, as if speaking from the other side of a wall. "You don't have to, sweetheart. It's okay if you don't want to." But he did. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe he just didn't know how to walk away. Kevin stepped forward, his legs unsteady, his breath coming in uneven waves. His fingers twitched at his sides, unsure of what to do. The sheet was soft beneath his fingertips. Slowly, carefully, he pulled it back. His brother lay there, impossibly still. His skin was pale, lips tinged with a color Kevin didn't have a name for. His tiny hands were curled into loose fists, his eyelashes delicate against his cheeks. Kevin's throat burned. This was wrong. His brother was supposed to cry, to move, to open his eyes and see the world waiting for him. He was supposed to hear Kevin's voice, the one that had whispered stories through their mother's belly, promising dinosaurs and adventures and all the things big brothers were supposed to teach. But he was quiet. Too quiet. Kevin swallowed against the tightness in his chest and reached out, his hands trembling as he lifted the tiny body into his arms. He was warm, not as warm as their mother, but not cold either. Not yet. Kevin cradled him carefully, like his mother had taught him when she let him practice with the stuffed bear. His arms knew what to do, even if his heart didn't. His lips trembled. "Hey, little guy." His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "It's me, your big brother." The words caught in his throat. He sniffed hard, squeezing his eyes shut. I'm sorry," he whispered, rocking the baby gently. "I should have done something. I should have told them to save you too." His chest hurt, his breath shaky. "I was going to teach you everything," he continued, his voice breaking. "About dinosaurs, about space, about all the best hiding spots in the house." His arms tightened around the fragile body. "I don't know why you had to leave," he whispered. "But it's not fair." Kevin pressed his forehead to his brother's, his small shoulders trembling. "Please don't go." Silence. And then a gasp. Kevin's eyes flew open. For a moment he thought he had imagined it. But then, in the quiet of the room, a tiny sound filled the air. A cry, weak, fragile, but real. Kevin barely had time to react before the machines behind him beeped in alarm. Nurses rushed in, their voices sharp with urgency. Someone pulled him back, lifting the baby from his arms, but Kevin barely noticed. He stood there, breathless, heart pounding in his ears, watching as the doctors scrambled. The baby cried again, louder this time. A doctor shouted for oxygen. A nurse called for the NICU team. Hands moved quickly, adjusting tubes, pressing stethoscopes against a chest that had been still only moments ago. Kevin didn't move. His brother was alive. His brother was alive. Tears blurred his vision as he covered his mouth, a choked sound escaping his lips. He had been so sure it was too late. But it wasn't. Kevin turned, sprinting down the hall, his feet pounding against the tile. He didn't stop until he reached his mother's room, breathless and shaking. "Mom!" His voice cracked as he burst through the door. Diane was awake now, barely, her head resting against the pillow, her face pale and exhausted. Her eyes widened in alarm at the sight of him. But before she could speak, Kevin ran to her, gripping her hand. "He's okay," Kevin sobbed, barely able to get the words out. "Mum, he's okay." Diane blinked slowly, her expression dazed, as if she couldn't quite understand what he was saying. Then, from the hallway, the sound came again. A cry. Small, weak, but real. Diane let out a breath, a sound that was half a sob, half a prayer, as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Her hands trembled as she gripped Kevin's. Her baby was alive. Kevin buried his face into her shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on his chest lifted. The storm outside had passed, and inside that hospital room, a miracle had taken its place. The hospital room was silent, except for the quiet hum of the machines and the faint, steady breaths of the two boys beside Diane. She lay awake, her body still weak, but her mind restless. Kevin had curled into the chair next to her bed, his small hands still gripping the sheets, as if afraid she would disappear if he let go. He hadn't left her side in days. Lucas, no longer attached to wires and monitors, lay asleep in the bassinet, his tiny chest rising and falling. It should have been a moment of peace. It wasn't. Diane stared at the ceiling, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. The weight of exhaustion pressed against her ribs, but it wasn't just physical. The ache ran deeper, curling into places she couldn't reach. She had nearly lost everything, and Charlie, he didn't even know. She had seen the missed calls piling up, the unread messages flashing on her phone, but she never answered. Not once, because if she heard his voice, if she listened to his excuses, she might crumble, and she refused to break. The betrayal was still fresh, raw in her chest, mixing with the grief, the fear, the unbearable weight of everything she had endured alone. Diane exhaled slowly, her fingers pressing against her temples. How easy it must have been for him, sitting thousands of miles away, completely unaware of what had happened here. She imagined it. The warmth of the Spanish sun, the gentle clink of wine glasses, the soft laughter of the woman in the photographs. Had he felt even a fraction of what she had gone through? Had he ever, for even a second, felt the weight of loss pressing against his chest like she had? Number. Because Charlie didn't even know, and she wasn't going to tell him. She couldn't stay here. Not in this city. Not in this house. Not in a place where every shadow whispered a reminder of what she had lost. Diane glanced at Kevin, brushing a hand over his hair. He shifted slightly but didn't wake. She pressed a kiss to Lucas's forehead, inhaling the soft, newborn scent of him. "Mum," she whispered. A pause, then soft and understanding. "Come home, sweetheart." Diane let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was past midnight when she stepped through the front door of their house. The air felt different, not lived in, not like home. The nursery door was still ajar, just as she had left it. The soft glow of the nightlight cast long shadows over the tiny crib, the folded blankets, the rows of baby clothes she had once picked with such care. Everything was waiting. Everything had been prepared for a life that had almost never been. Her fingers trailed over the crib rail, the tiny mattress still untouched, still perfect. A choked breath slipped past her lips. She had stood here so many nights before, rubbing her belly, whispering about all the things she would teach him, and then, in the span of hours, she had almost buried him. Diane squeezed her eyes shut, willing the memories away. Not here. Not now. She turned and moved quickly, pulling an old suitcase from the closet. The sound of zippers breaking the silence felt too loud, but she didn't stop. She moved through the bedroom, pulling out only what they needed. Clothes for her, for Kevin, for Lucas. Nothing more. She didn't let herself think about what she was leaving behind. A framed photo on the nightstand caught her eye. It was taken years ago, when life had still been simple. Charlie had his arms around her, laughing, the sunlight catching the gold in his hair. Kevin sat on his shoulders, grinning, his tiny hands in the air like he could touch the sky. Diane picked up the frame, running her fingers over the glass. That woman, that family, they didn't exist anymore. Her grip tightened for a moment before she set the frame face down on the table. She took one last look around the room. The closet still held Charlie's suits. His cologne still lingered in the air. The bed still had the imprint of the last night they had spent together, before he left, before the world she knew collapsed. A deep ache spread through her chest. Then she turned and walked away. Kevin woke to the sound of soft footsteps. He blinked, groggy, his head still fuzzy from sleep. The hospital room was darker now, quieter. The nurses weren't coming in and out anymore. And then he saw her. His mother was dressed, her hospital gown replaced with real clothes. A bag sat by her feet, half-zipped. Kevin's stomach twisted. "Mom?" His voice came out small. Diane turned, startled, but when she saw him awake, her expression softened. She sat beside him, running a hand through his messy hair. "Hey, sweetheart," she murmured. Kevin's eyes darted to the bag, then to Lucas, bundled in his bassinet. "We're leaving, aren't we?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Diane hesitated. She cupped his face, brushing a thumb over his cheek. "Yes." Kevin swallowed hard. "Dad doesn't know." "No," Diane admitted. A long silence stretched between them. Kevin looked down, his fingers twisting into the blanket. But he didn't argue. He didn't ask where they were going, because maybe, deep down, he already knew. Diane kissed his forehead. Go back to sleep, sweetheart. We'll be home soon." Kevin didn't answer, but as he curled into her side, as her arms wrapped around him, he held on just a little tighter, because home wasn't a place anymore. It was her. And for now, that was enough. Did the images of Diane giving birth and Lucas's resurrection move you? If so, leave a comment saying, "Rain." The plane touched down smoothly, the wheels skimming against the asphalt before settling into a slow, rolling stop. Outside, the city twinkled with familiar lights, and Charlie Spencer exhaled, stretching his shoulders. He was home. He glanced at his phone, expecting another missed call, another unread text from Diane, but there was nothing. He frowned, checking again. He had tried calling several times in the past few days, but she hadn't answered. He told himself it wasn't unusual. She was nearing the last weeks of her pregnancy, probably exhausted, busy with Kevin, maybe even out shopping for the final baby essentials. Still, an odd weight settled in his chest as he stepped off the plane. He shook it off. He had been gone too long. Diane was probably annoyed at him for being away. A nice dinner, a few sweet words, and everything would be fine. Charlie slid into the waiting car, tapping his fingers restlessly against his knee as the driver pulled out onto the highway. It had been too long since he had been home. Too long since he had held Diane. He would make up for it. When he arrived, the house was dark. Charlie frowned as he stepped out of the car, rolling his suitcase behind him. The porch light wasn't on, and the curtains were drawn tightly shut. Strange. Diane always left the lights on when she knew he was coming home late. Maybe she had fallen asleep early. Still, a quiet unease settled in his stomach. He pushed open the front door, the familiar scent of home greeting him. He expected warmth, laughter, Kevin running toward him, Diane's tired but happy smile as she rubbed her belly. Instead, the house was eerily silent. Charlie set his suitcase down carefully. "Diane?" No answer. His pulse quickened. He stepped further inside, glancing toward the living room. Everything looked the same, untouched. "Kevin?" His voice wavered slightly. Silence. His eyes flickered to the kitchen counter. Diane's car keys weren't there. Neither was her phone charger. Something was wrong. Charlie moved quickly now, climbing the stairs 2 at a time. He pushed open the bedroom door, half expecting to find her curled up in bed. But the bed was empty. His eyes darted around the room. The closet door was slightly ajar. Charlie stepped forward and pulled it open, his stomach twisting violently at the sight inside. Half of her clothes were gone. His breath caught, his heartbeat slamming against his ribs. Number. He turned sharply and crossed the hall to Kevin's room. The closet there was half empty too. Panic clawed its way up his throat. Charlie stumbled toward the nursery. The door was open, and inside, the crib was untouched. No bottles, no blankets, nothing. Cold dread settled in his bones. His phone was already in his hands before he realized he was dialing, straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. His hand shook as he pulled up the security app, his fingers tapping urgently. The camera feed loaded, and he scrolled back through the footage. And then he saw it. Diane, carrying a newborn in her arms. Kevin, clutching her hand, his small frame pressed close to her side. They were leaving. The suitcase, the way Diane hesitated on the front porch before disappearing into the night, Charlie felt like he had been punched in the gut. She had left. She had taken their children and left, and he had no idea why. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Charlie strode through the entrance, his heart pounding. He had spent the last 20 minutes calling every number he could think of. Diane's phone was disconnected. Kevin's tablet was off. The security company couldn't track her car. He had one place left to look. He stormed toward the reception desk, his voice tight. "I need to know if my wife, Diane Spencer, was admitted here in the last few days." The receptionist blinked at him. "I'm sorry, sir, we can't..." Charlie slammed his hands down. She was pregnant, he said sharply. More than 7 months. If she gave birth, it would have been here. The woman flinched but quickly checked the system. Her eyes flickered with something. Recognition. Sympathy. Charlie's stomach dropped. She hesitated before saying, "Please wait here." Seconds stretched into eternity before a doctor finally approached. The man looked tired, worn. "Mr. Spencer." Charlie nodded stiffly. "Where's my wife?" The doctor's expression darkened. "She's no longer here." Charlie's breath hitched. "She... What?" "She was discharged. But Mr. Spencer, you should know. She had a very complicated birth." Charlie felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. A complicated birth. The world around him blurred as the doctor kept speaking. "She lost a lot of blood. We had to perform an emergency procedure to save her life. And the baby, we thought he wasn't going to make it. The baby. His son." Charlie's knees nearly buckled. "My son?" The doctor exhaled. "He survived. But it was a miracle." Charlie swayed on his feet. His son had almost died. His wife had almost died, and he hadn't known. His hands clenched into fists. "Why didn't anyone call me?" The doctor hesitated. "Sir?" "We did." Charlie stilled. "She listed you as the emergency contact. We tried multiple times, but no one answered." His blood ran cold. That wasn't possible. Unless she had called while he was in Spain. Unless she had called while he had been too busy, too distracted, too blind to see that his world was falling apart. He felt sick. "Where is she?" His voice was barely above a whisper. The doctor's face softened. "We don't know." Charlie's head snapped up. "She left the hospital 2 nights ago," the doctor continued. "She didn't tell anyone where she was going." Charlie turned away, his heart hammering in his chest. She had left. She had almost died. Their baby had almost died. And she hadn't told him. Because she hadn't wanted to. Charlie clenched his jaw, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone. She had cut him out completely. But he wasn't going to let her go. Not without a fight. The town was nothing like the city they had left behind. It was small, tucked between rolling hills and endless stretches of quiet roads. No towering buildings, no car horns blaring at all hours. Just the sound of birds in the morning, the occasional chatter of neighbors, and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Diane liked it that way. She had chosen this place because it was quiet, because no one asked too many questions, because she could disappear here. The house was small but comfortable. A simple 2-bedroom rental with a worn wooden porch and a garden in desperate need of care. Kevin had taken to it immediately, running through the backyard as if the open space made up for all the things they had left behind. Lucas, still fragile, spent most of his time in Diane's arms. She held him close every chance she got, terrified that if she let go, he might slip away again. She kept her head down, avoided unnecessary conversation. When the neighbors greeted her, she smiled politely but never lingered. Diane had no room for attachments. Her only focus was her children. Kevin didn't complain. He never asked why they left or when they were going back. But Diane saw the way he watched the phone on the kitchen counter, the way his shoulders tensed every time she ignored an unknown number. She knew he missed his father, and she hated that she couldn't take that away from him. Charlie had never been good at waiting. He had spent weeks chasing ghosts, following leads that led nowhere. Diane had covered her tracks well. Her phone was disconnected. The credit cards linked to their shared accounts had stopped being used the night she left. The security company had no record of her entering any hotel or rental property. But Charlie was relentless. He hired the best private investigator he could find, someone who had no patience for failure. And after weeks of silence, his persistence paid off. A town, a quiet, tucked-away town where no one would think to look. His heart pounded as he drove through the unfamiliar streets. This wasn't just about finding her. It was about answers. Why had she left? Why hadn't she called him? Why hadn't she told him about their son? His knuckles tightened around the steering wheel. He needed to see them, and this time, he wouldn't let them go. The afternoon sun was high when Charlie pulled onto the street, his pulse hammering. The investigator had given him an address, a modest house, simple and unassuming. He parked down the road, hands gripping the steering wheel. Then, through the open yard, he saw him, Kevin, his son, running barefoot across the grass, his laughter carrying through the air. He looked taller, older somehow, but still the same boy Charlie had left behind. Charlie's breath caught in his throat, and then Kevin turned. His eyes landed on the car. For a moment, they both froze. Then, recognition dawned on Kevin's face. His entire body lit up. "Dad!" The sound of it was like a punch to Diane's chest. She was inside, rocking Lucas in her arms when she heard it. Her heart stopped. Charlie. Number. Not now. Not here. She rushed to the window, just in time to see Kevin sprinting across the yard, his arms wide, his face full of pure, unfiltered joy. Charlie barely had time to step out of the car before Kevin crashed into him, gripping him in a fierce hug. Charlie's arms wrapped around his son instinctively, his breath shuddering. Kevin buried his face in his father's chest. "You found us." Charlie swallowed hard, his hands tightening on Kevin's back. "I told you I would." The moment should have been whole, should have been perfect. But then he looked up and saw Diane standing on the porch, holding their baby. Charlie's chest tightened. Their baby. His son. And in that moment, he realized how much he had lost. Diane's eyes burned into him, her expression unreadable. Then, before he could speak, before he could even process what was happening, her hand struck his face. The slap echoed in the quiet street. Kevin gasped. Charlie didn't move. Diane's voice shook with rage. "You almost killed us." Charlie's head snapped back, his eyes widening. "What?" Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice didn't waver. "You left me. You left us. And when I needed you the most, you weren't there." His throat felt tight. You didn't know," she spat, her grip on Lucas tightening, "because you weren't paying attention." Charlie's entire body tensed. She wasn't just angry. She was broken. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he realized this wasn't just about betrayal. This was about survival. She had almost died, and she had done it alone. His jaw clenched. "Diane, please." But she shook her head, stepping back. "I don't know why you're here," she whispered, "but you don't belong in our lives anymore." Charlie's heart shattered, but he wasn't giving up. Not now, not ever. Charlie's cheek still burned from the slap, but the pain was nothing compared to the devastation in Diane's eyes. He had prepared himself for anger, for resentment, but this was something deeper. This was grief. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Diane," he said quietly, "I don't know what you think happened, but I swear to you, I never betrayed you." Her laughter was sharp and bitter. "You expect me to believe that?" "Yes," he said, his voice unwavering. "Because it's the truth." Diane's grip on Lucas tightened, as if shielding him from a danger she couldn't name. "I saw the pictures, Charlie. I saw you with her." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, doubt flickered in her expression. "You walked into that hotel with her. You were holding her." Charlie exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "What? Pictures in Spain? What are you talking about? Could it be... Diane? Listen to me. Her name is Michelle. She's a business partner. That night she collapsed. I caught her. That's it." Diane's lips parted, but she said nothing. "I took her to her room because she needed help," he continued, desperate for her to see the truth. "I left as soon as I made sure she was okay." Silence stretched between them. Diane's breathing was uneven, her jaw tight. "Then why were there pictures?" she demanded. "Who sent them?" Charlie's muscles tensed. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Diane's fingers trembled as she clutched the baby closer to her chest. She wanted to believe him. Charlie could see it in her face, but the wound was still fresh, the betrayal still real in her mind. "You should leave," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Kevin is happy here. I don't want to go back." Charlie's jaw clenched. He wanted to fight, to push, to demand that she listen, but she was fragile, and forcing her would only drive her further away. So he swallowed the protest rising in his throat and nodded. But this wasn't over. Charlie hadn't slept in days. Back at his hotel, he pored over every detail of the past month, retracing every step. Someone had sent those photos. Someone had orchestrated this, and that someone had wanted to destroy his family. He sat at his laptop, scrolling through security footage from the house. The night Diane had left, there had been movement outside the gate. A figure, hooded, leaving something by the door. The envelope. Charlie's pulse quickened. He froze the frame, zooming in. He didn't recognize the man, but that didn't matter. Someone would. Charlie picked up his phone. "Find him," he ordered his investigator. "Now." It took less than 48 hours. The man's name was Mark Holloway, a low-level fixer, someone who did dirty work for the right price. Charlie had him cornered in an abandoned parking lot by the docks, flanked by two men who made sure Mark didn't run. Charlie stepped forward, his patience razor-thin. "You delivered an envelope to my house a few weeks ago. Who hired you?" Mark sneered, but there was nervousness behind his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." Charlie didn't blink. "I'm not asking again." Mark's jaw tightened, but the fear was creeping in now. "Look, man, I was just told to drop it off, all right?" His voice was thinner now, weaker. "Didn't ask questions." Charlie tilted his head, his tone deadly calm. "Who gave it to you?" Mark hesitated. One of Charlie's men stepped forward. Mark swallowed hard. "Thomas," he blurted out. "Thomas Spencer." The world stilled. Charlie's blood turned to ice. His own brother. Mark must have seen the shift in Charlie's expression because he rushed to explain. "I don't know why, man. He just gave me the package and told me where to take it." Charlie took a step back, his breath slow and measured. Thomas, his own flesh and blood. Charlie clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He had been looking for a stranger. Instead, the enemy had been standing beside him all along. And now Thomas was going to pay. The heavy oak doors of Spencer Enterprises slammed open as Charlie stormed through the hallway, his footsteps echoing with sharp, unrelenting purpose. Employees glanced up in alarm, but quickly looked away. No one wanted to be in his path. Thomas Spencer sat behind his desk, lounging as if he owned the world. A smirk curled at the edges of his lips when he saw Charlie. "Brother," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. What a surprise. Charlie didn't waste time with pleasantries. He tossed a thick folder onto the desk. Surveillance images, phone records, Mark Holloway's confession. Evidence. Undeniable, irrefutable proof of what Thomas had done. "You set me up," Charlie said, his voice eerily calm. "You nearly killed my wife and son." Thomas exhaled through his nose, feigning boredom as he skimmed through the papers. "I suppose you finally put the pieces together," he mused, tapping a finger against the desk. "Took you long enough." Charlie's fingers twitched at his side, the urge to strike his brother nearly overwhelming. "Why?" His voice was a razor's edge. Thomas chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on, Charlie. We both know why." His eyes darkened, the mask of amusement slipping just enough to reveal the bitterness beneath. "You were always the golden boy, the one who got everything, the company, the inheritance, the perfect family." Charlie's jaw clenched. "So you tried to ruin my life?" I tried to level the playing field. Thomas leaned forward, his smirk widening. Diane was just a casualty of war. If she lost the baby, well, I can take one less competitor off the list of heirs. I can't leave empty-handed, especially since our father left most of everything to you, since you're the eldest son. Rage flared, white-hot and blinding. Before he could stop himself, Charlie's fist connected with Thomas's face. The impact sent Thomas sprawling, blood trickling from his lip. He groaned, wiping at his mouth before laughing, a low, taunting sound. "That all you got?" Charlie loomed over him, fists clenched at his sides. "You're done." Thomas's smile faltered. "You're out of the company, out of the will, out of my life." Charlie's voice was cold, final. "You mean nothing to me now." Thomas paled. "You think you can just erase me?" He spat, scrambling to his feet. "This company is just as much mine as it is yours." "Not anymore," Charlie countered. "Security will escort you out. By tomorrow, you won't have a dime left from me." Thomas lunged forward, but Charlie didn't flinch. "You did this to yourself," he said, his voice quieter now, steadier. "You wanted me to lose everything, and instead you lost me." For the first time, something like fear flickered in Thomas's eyes. Charlie turned without another word. He didn't look back. The night was cool, the distant hum of cicadas filling the silence as Charlie pulled up outside the small house. The last time he had stood here, Diane had struck him, her words sharp and unforgiving. But now, he wasn't just bringing explanations. He was bringing the truth. The porch light flickered on before he could knock. Diane stood in the doorway, arms crossed, weary eyes scanning his face. She said nothing as she stepped aside, letting him in. Kevin was asleep on the couch, curled beneath a thin blanket. Lucas lay in the bassinet beside him, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Charlie exhaled, his chest tightening at the sight of them. His sons, his family. Diane spoke first. "Did you find out who sent them?" Charlie nodded. It was Thomas. Something flickered across her face. Shock, realization, anger. "He wanted you to miscarry," Charlie continued, his voice thick, "to make sure I never had another heir." Diane inhaled sharply, her hands gripping the back of the chair. "Your own brother?" Charlie let out a bitter laugh. "He's not my brother anymore." Silence stretched between them. Diane lowered herself into the chair, rubbing her temple. "I don't know what to say." Charlie stepped forward cautiously. "You don't have to say anything. I needed you to know the truth." Her gaze met his. "And now what?" Charlie swallowed. "That's up to you." Diane looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. For the first time since this nightmare began, there was no anger in her face, no resentment, just exhaustion. Finally, she stood and walked to the bassinet. She lifted Lucas gently, cradling him in her arms before turning back to Charlie. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she stepped closer, and for the first time, she let him hold his son. Charlie's breath hitched as the small, warm weight settled against his chest. Lucas stirred slightly, his tiny fingers curling into the fabric of Charlie's shirt. Diane watched him carefully, studying every reaction. The air between them was still heavy, still full of words unsaid. But for the first time, it was no longer unbreakable. 11. The Spencer estate had never felt so foreign. Diane stood in the grand foyer, staring at the vast space that once felt like home, but now seemed too large, too empty despite its beauty. The elegant chandeliers still dripped with gold, the polished floors gleamed under the warm lights, but the house itself had changed. Or maybe she had. Kevin ran past her, his small footsteps echoing through the hallway as he darted toward his old room. He had been hesitant at first, clinging to her side, but the familiar sights and smells had eased the tension in his shoulders. Charlie carried their luggage inside, his movements careful, as if afraid one wrong step would break the fragile peace they had just begun to rebuild. Diane exhaled. She had agreed to come back, not for the house, not for Charlie, for the boys, for Kevin, who missed his father, for Lucas, who deserved to know him. But as she stepped further inside, she wondered if she had also come back for herself. Kevin understood more than they thought. He wasn't a little kid anymore. He had seen the way his mum's hands trembled when she first stepped into the house. He had noticed the way his dad moved carefully around her, never getting too close, never speaking too loudly. They were different now. Kevin didn't understand all of it, but he knew this. Love wasn't just words. It wasn't just saying "I love you" before bed, or hugging someone when you missed them. Love was actions. Love was his dad showing up when they thought he wouldn't. Love was his mom giving him a soft smile, even when she was still hurting. Love was staying, even when leaving felt easier. Kevin didn't say any of this out loud. Instead, he watched. He watched the way his mom sat at the dinner table again, even if she barely spoke. He watched the way his dad checked on Lucas every night, sitting by the crib in silence. They weren't fixed. But maybe they were trying. And that was enough. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Diane was in the nursery, folding baby clothes. Kevin sat cross-legged on the floor, lining up his dinosaurs while Charlie rocked Lucas in his arms. The tension between them had softened, but things were still fragile, still careful. Then, a sound. Software, unexpected, a laugh. Diane froze, her fingers still gripping a tiny onesie. Kevin's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Lucas had never laughed before, not once. Charlie stared down at his son, stunned. Lucas's tiny mouth curled into something unmistakable, pure, unfiltered joy. And then he did it again, a bright, gurgling giggle. Kevin broke first, scrambling to his feet. He laughed. Diane pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes shining with something raw and unguarded. Charlie turned toward her, still holding Lucas, still caught in the weight of the moment. For the first time, Diane truly looked at him, not with anger, not with grief, just with something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Her fingers hesitated. Then, slowly, they brushed over his hand. It was the smallest touch, but it was everything. Charlie didn't speak. He just held onto it, held onto her. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Kevin curled up beside the crib. Lucas was asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Kevin watched him for a moment, remembering the hospital, remembering the way he had begged, pleaded, whispered to him in the silence. But now, there was no fear, no desperation, just love. Kevin reached out, gently tracing a fingertip over Lucas's tiny hand. "I'm going to take care of you," he whispered. "No matter what." Lucas stirred slightly, his fingers curling around Kevin's. A vow, a promise, a family, beginning again. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.